Welcome to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight's episode: How Plague and Hunger Turned Peasants into Beasts. A Quiet Village. A spreading plague. No law, no food. Just desperation. What really happened when the world fell apart. In the Middle Ages? Get cozy, hit play, and let the madness of history lull you to sleep. Or not, let us know in the comments. What time are you watching this? It was a year like no other. The sun seemed weaker. The clouds stayed longer. The rain fell more often than anyone could remember. The fields were wet and heavy, and the seeds that were planted either did not grow or grew into thin, sickly plants. The wheat was small. The rye bent over too soon. The barley, once golden and strong, now turned dark with mold. In the village of Thistlebrook, people noticed the change. At first, they simply shook their heads. A bad season, they said. It happens. Old Marta, the baker's mother, said it. Reminded her of a summer many years ago, but even she couldn't remember one this strange. The animals felt it too. Chickens laid fewer eggs. Cows gave less milk. When the harvest finally came, it was poor. The barns, once full and warm with the smell of grain, were nearly empty. The village council met in the little chapel, with worried looks and long silences. There would not be enough bread for the winter. Still, the villagers were used to hard times. They were not rich. They had lived through cold winters and long summers before. They decided to share what they had and make it last. Families began to save food carefully. Bread was made thinner. More water was added to soup. Children were told not to ask for seconds. In the evenings, people sat around their fires and told stories to forget about the hunger growing in their bellies. Then came the rats. First, just a few. Then more. They came into the barns and storerooms. They chewed through sacks. They left their little footprints in the flour. They ran across the rafters at night. The village cat could not keep up. Traps were made, but it was no use. The rats were hungry too. The people started to speak in whispers. We might not have enough. One morning, the baker's boy, Tom, opened the shop and found the last sack of flour torn open. White powder covered the floor. Tiny black shapes ran off into the cracks. Tom stood there for a long time. Then he sat down and cried. That night, the chapel bell rang. The villagers gathered. The baker, Tomas, stood at the front. He was not an angry man, but his hands shook as he spoke. This is not just a bad year, he said. This is something worse. We have to be careful. We have to decide what to do. They talked for hours. Some said they should go to the Lord of the land and ask for help. Others said the Lord would not care. He has his own storehouses. He will not feed us. One man said, we should send someone to the city. Someone else offered. Maybe they can bring flour back, but travel was hard and dangerous. The roads were muddy. There were stories of robbers and of strange sickness spreading from town to town. No one wanted to leave. So they stayed. They made rules. Each family could bake only twice a week. No one could keep secret stores of grain. Food would be counted. Shared, the village tried its best to hold together. But fear grew like a shadow, stretching across the land. Parents looked at their children with worry. The old stopped smiling, and one night, the first loaf went missing. Not a whole sack. Not a barrel. Just one loaf from the baker's shelf. It was taken during the night. No one had seen anything. At first, people were quiet about it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone forgot. But then another loaf disappeared the next night. And then some eggs. Then a small bag of barley. Eyes began to turn toward neighbors. Who would do this? They asked. Voices lowered. People locked their doors. But in a village so small, with no fences and no secrets, suspicion spreads fast. Children were told not to wander. Dogs were tied up. Even Marta, the old baker's mother, stopped visiting her friend in the next house. A tea was not just hunger that made people nervous. It was something else, something harder to name. The feeling that rules were starting to fade, that the things they all trusted, fairness, kindness, order, were slipping away. Like crumbs brushed from a table, one boy, Elric, said he saw someone moving behind the barn. Just a shape, dark and quick. But no one could prove anything. The village elder, Joran, said, "We must keep our heads. Hunger is not an excuse to lose who we are." He was old and kind. People listened, but not everyone agreed. A group of younger men began to take turns watching at night. They carried sticks. They said they would catch the thief. They meant well, but their faces were hard. On the seventh night, they saw someone, a small figure, hunched and quick, moving near the mill. They shouted and ran after it. The figure dropped a sack and disappeared into the woods. In the sack were 2 loaves, still warm. They searched, but could not find the thief. In the days that followed, the village changed. No one smiled. No one shared. Children played quietly, if at all. The baker started keeping his door locked. Even the chapel, once a place of peace, now felt cold. The fire inside was never lit anymore. The year the bread disappeared was not the worst year yet. That would come later. But it was the year something broke, not loudly, not all at once, but like a quiet crack in ice, spreading underfoot. Something had changed, and deep inside, everyone felt it, even if they couldn't say it aloud. It began with scratching. At first, it was only at night. A soft, quick sound, like little claws moving across wooden boards. Some thought it was the wind. Others said it was just the old barn settling, but then the noises grew louder, stronger, more frequent. Tom, the baker's boy, heard them while sleeping above the bakery. He lit a candle and listened. The sound came from below near the flour sacks. When he went down, he saw nothing, just a few white grains on the floor, a broken sack in the corner. He told Tomas the next morning. Tomas nodded slowly. "We must. Be careful. We can't lose anything more." They set traps, old wooden ones with little bits of cheese or meat. At first, a few rats were caught, small ones, then none. As if the rest had learned, Marta said the same thing was happening in the grain store near her home. She had seen small droppings near her dried peas. A bowl of oats had been chewed through. In just a week. The rats were everywhere. They ran across the beams in the barn. They made nests in hay piles. They moved like shadows, fast and silent. The cat, Bella, was tired and thin. She caught what she could, but it was not enough. At night, people could hear the scratching in their walls. Children woke from sleep, crying, saying they heard whispers. Their parents hushed them, said it was dreams. But the dreams came back. In the morning, teeth marks were found in the last apples, holes in sacks, a strange, sour smell in the air. People started talking about the rats. They're not normal. Marta said, they move too smart, too bold. Maybe they smell the hunger. Someone whispered, they've come for what little we have left. The elder Joran said, rats come when food is left out. Let us clean better. Let us seal what we can. But they had already done all they could. There were no new sacks to use, no extra wood to build new boxes. One morning, Elric found something odd. A pile of small bones behind the mill. Rat bones, yes, but also bird bones. Clean, picked dry. Arranged in a circle. He told no one. The next day, the miller found a rat nest inside his flour barrel. He burned it. The smoke carried the scent of rot and ash. People stopped eating late. They feared leaving crumbs. They kept candles lit longer, though wax was scarce. One girl, Lena, saw a rat on the church altar. She gasped. The rat looked at her for a moment before running off. After that, no one went to the church at night, and still the rats came quiet, quick, watching. They were not the biggest problem, not yet, but they were the beginning of something darker, and the villagers could feel it coming like a cold wind before a storm. Winter came earlier than expected. The air grew colder with each passing day. Frost kissed the windows of every cottage, and the mornings were filled with silence, broken only by the sound of coughing. At first, no one noticed. After all, coughs were common in the cold months. But then the coughs didn't stop. It was the blacksmith's wife who first took ill. Her name was Hilda, and she was a strong woman, used to lifting heavy logs and carrying water from the well. One morning, she stayed in bed. Her husband, Olaf, said she had a chill. She just needs rest, he told the neighbors. But after 3 days, she could barely speak. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and her skin was hot like fire, the healer. Old Jana came to visit. She brewed herbs and left a cloth soaked in vinegar near Hilda's bed. She must be kept warm. Keep the air moving, she said. But nothing helped. On the 5th day, Hilda passed away quietly. As the morning sun tried to shine through thick clouds, the village was quiet that day. Hilda had no enemies. She was kind, always smiling. Her death felt unfair, and unfairness makes fear grow. 3 days later, a child fell ill. Then another. Then the old shepherd who lived near the edge of the woods. The cough spread like smoke, slow, invisible, and everywhere. Some said it was the wind. Others blamed the rats. Tomas, the baker, started, closing his shop earlier. He wore a cloth over his mouth. Just in case, he said. At the chapel, Joran spoke to a smaller and smaller crowd each Sunday. This is a time to stay calm, to help one another. Do not turn to fear, he said, but fear had already arrived. People avoided each other. Neighbors who once shared bread now kept their distance. Doors stayed closed. Fires burned longer, not for warmth, but for safety. It was said that smoke kept sickness away. When the miller's son died, they buried him in the cold ground before sunset. No one rang the chapel bell. No one gathered. His father stood alone as the earth was covered. Some villagers began making signs with chalk on their doors, symbols to protect their homes. Others placed bundles of herbs at windows. Marta whispered prayers she hadn't said in years. Elric, the boy who once saw the dark figure by the barn, was now quiet all the time. He sat by the fire and stared. His mother worried. He had not been sick, but something about him seemed changed. One evening, Lena heard a soft knocking on her door. She opened it and found a woman she did not recognize. The woman wore layers of cloth, and her face was partly covered. I heard you need herbs, she said. Lena, frightened but curious, let her in. The woman moved slowly, placing a pouch on the table. Burn these. Keep the smoke thick. Then she left, vanishing. Down the path into the mist, the next morning, Lena's father said he saw footprints by the barn. Bare feet, too small for a grown man, whispers spread. Some said there were others in the woods, people who had fled the village, or strangers hiding from the sickness. People began locking their doors, not just from illness, but from those outside. The cough didn't stop. Some got better. Some didn't, and still the village waited, not knowing what would come next. In the dark corners of every home, someone sat listening for the next cough and wondering when it would be their turn. The chapel door creaked in the wind. For 3 days, no one had seen Father Ulrich. He had always been present before, standing at the altar with folded hands, walking through the village in his brown robe, speaking calmly to those in fear. But now his cottage was dark, his door locked, and the chapel empty. On the 4th morning, Marta went to check on him. She knocked softly. No answer. She knocked again. The door opened just a little. Inside, there was no fire, no light, and no Father Ulrich. The room smelled of wax and dry herbs. His bed was neatly made. His book of prayers lay closed on the table. By midday, the whole village knew. The priest had vanished. Some said he had gone to find help. Others believed he had fallen ill and gone into the forest to die alone. But most feared something worse, that he had fled not from sickness, but from something he had seen. At sunset, Joran stood outside the chapel and spoke. We do not know where he has gone, but we still have our chapel. We still have each other. They nodded. But the chapel felt different now, colder, emptier. Thomas the baker came the next morning to light a candle. It flickered, then went out. He tried again. The flame returned, but swayed wildly, as if disturbed by a breath no one could feel. That night, more families began placing herbs at their doors. Some carved crosses into the wood with small knives. A few stopped speaking altogether, moving quietly through their days like ghosts. Then the children saw something strange. Lena's younger brother, Jarek, said he saw a figure near the chapel bell tower. It looked like Father Ulrich, he whispered. But his eyes were closed. No one believed him. Until Ulrich said he saw the same thing. Standing still, Ulrich added. Hands folded, but not moving, not even breathing. 2 nights later, the bell rang once. Only once. At midnight, .1 had pulled the rope. The village woke in silence. No one went outside. No one checked the bell. In the morning, the wind had knocked over a bench outside the chapel. Or at least, that's what they told each other. Joran kept speaking to the people, though fewer came to listen. He was not a priest, but he was old, and he still believed in order. In peace, we must stay kind, he said, even when it's hard. Especially now, but even Joran began to look tired. His hands trembled as he held his walking stick. His voice, once clear, now faded at the end of every sentence. The chapel remained open, but most stayed away. Only one person still visited each morning, a girl named Mira. She was young, barely more than a child, but she came to light a candle and say a few words. She told no one what she prayed for. One morning, Mira found a note on the altar. It was written in a hand no one recognized. Pray if you must, but do not hope. The old rules are breaking. She showed it to Joran. He read it twice, then burned it in the candle flame. That night, for the first time in months, it snowed, soft, silent snow, covering the village like a blanket. But underneath the white, something deeper stirred, and still the priest did not return. He came from the east, just after the new snow had begun to melt. The road was still soft and wet underfoot, and the sky stayed gray like ash. Children saw him first, a tall figure, walking slowly up the muddy path toward the village. His coat was long and black. His boots were heavy and dark with old dirt. But what made them stare was his mask. It looked like a bird's beak, long, curved, and strange. The eyes of the mask were round and black, like glass marbles. The children ran to tell their parents. Soon a crowd had gathered at the edge of the village. No one spoke. The man stopped and looked at them, or at least, his head turned in their direction. "I am a doctor," he said, his voice muffled behind the mask. "I have come to help." Joran stepped forward. "We did not send for a doctor." The man nodded. "No, but I heard the bells. And the bells do not lie." He said his name was Corvin. He did not remove his mask. He carried a leather satchel filled with small glass jars, dried herbs, cloth soaked in oil, and thin wooden sticks. Joran, though hesitant, allowed him to stay. Corvin was given the old weaver's hut, abandoned since summer. He cleaned it himself, boiled water, burned something bitter in a small dish that made the air sharp. To clear the sickness, he said, he walked the village slowly each morning. People watched him from behind doors and windows. He checked on the sick, but never touched them directly. He spoke quietly and gave instructions. "Burn this. Drink this. Bury the clothing." Some were grateful. Others were afraid. "Why does he wear that mask?" Children asked. "To keep the bad air out." Their parents answered. "That's what doctors believe," but the mask made people uneasy. When he passed, even animals grew still. Corvin asked many questions. About the first to fall ill, about the rats, about the priest. He visited the chapel. He stood at the altar a long time, saying nothing. Then he placed a small white flower there and left. Mira followed him once. She watched him go into the forest and return an hour later with roots and bark. She never told anyone. One evening, Corvin called for a meeting. Only a few came. "The sickness is not just of the body," he said. "It is also in the air and in the mind. Fear feeds it." He gave each family a bundle of herbs to burn. "Keep your homes dry. Speak kindly. Stay apart, but do not turn to hate." His words were calm, but something about him remained distant, like a shadow that did not belong to anything solid. Some believed he brought safety. Others said he brought something worse, but no one asked him to leave because deep down they feared what might happen if he did. And so the man with the beak stayed. Each day he walked. Each night he wrote notes no one saw, and the village held its breath. The ground had become too hard. Winter's second frost had set deep into the soil, and even the strongest men could barely dig more than a few inches. The wooden shovels cracked. The metal ones bent. The graveyard behind the chapel, once a quiet place with rows of stones and wooden crosses, was now still and full. The last burial had taken place 2 days before. A child. Only a few came to watch. The wind blew hard, and snow mixed with dirt as the hole was covered quickly. After that, Joran quietly told the villagers to stop. "We must wait," he said, though they all knew there was no time to wait. The sickness had not stopped. The coughing came earlier each morning. The weak became weaker. The healer, Yana, had nothing more to give. "Only rest," she said, "and prayers." But prayers were growing quiet. Corvin, the man with the beak, said, "The bodies must be burned." "It is safer," he said. "The sickness lingers in the flesh." At first, the villagers refused. Burning the dead felt wrong. It was not their way. The thought of smoke carrying their loved ones into the sky made many look away. Then one morning, the carpenter's wife passed away in her bed. Her husband, too weak to bury her, left her wrapped in cloth behind the house. The snow had hidden her for a day. On the second day, dogs found her. After that, the fire was built. It was made behind. The weaver's hut in a space no longer used. Wood was stacked high. Corvin brought oils and bitter herbs to burn with the bodies. So the wind will not carry the wrong things. He said the first burning was silent. And no songs. No words. Just the sound of fire and the crack of dry wood. People watched from far away. Some turned their backs. Others wept quietly. Even the children said nothing. After that, the dead were brought at night, wrapped in cloth. Left at the edge of the fire. And no names were spoken. Corvin stood by each one. He said a few words, but no one could hear them through the mask. Soon there were fewer bodies. Not because the sickness had ended, but because those still alive had learned to hide it. To cough only when alone. To sleep far from others. Joran tried to bring the village together. We must not lose our ways, he said. We must remember who we are, but fewer people came to the chapel. Mira still lit candles, but she often stood alone. One evening, she asked Corvin, "Do you think they're at peace?" Corvin looked at the flame. "I think they are quiet now. And quiet is better than fear." That night, the fire burned 4 hours, and the village slept without dreams, because dreams, too, had become too heavy to carry. At the far end of the village, past the last row of homes and down a muddy slope, there stood a small house by the stream. It had once belonged to an old couple, both long gone. Now it was said to be empty, but smoke sometimes curled from its chimney, and candles were seen flickering behind the windows at night. The villagers spoke little of the house. When children asked, their parents simply said, "Don't go there." It was Lena who first noticed the signs. On her way to gather water, she saw herbs hanging by the door, dried and tied with twine. She recognized some, but others she did not. There were also markings drawn in chalk on the stones near the stream. Circles, crosses, and curved lines that didn't look like any letters she knew. One morning, Tomas the baker said he saw someone moving near the house. A woman, wearing a dark shawl, bent over the ground, as if planting something. "That place has a watcher," he said, "but not one who wants to be known." Rumors grew. Some believed the woman was a healer from another village. Others said she was a spirit. A few whispered that she had once lived in Thistlebrook, long ago, and had returned only now. When the sickness came, Mira, curious and brave, decided to visit the house. She waited for the sun to be high, then followed the stream. Birds flew overhead, but none sang. When she reached the house, she stopped. It was quiet. The smoke from the chimney rose straight into the still sky. She stepped closer and knocked. No answer. She turned to leave, but then the door opened. A woman stood there, older than Mira expected. Her face was lined, her eyes dark and still. She wore a necklace made of wooden beads and tiny bones. "I know why you're here," the woman said. "I just wanted to ask what you burn in your fire." Mira replied. The woman nodded. "Things that keep the bad out. Does it work?" The woman paused. "Sometimes," she handed Mira a small pouch. "Hang this near your bed. It won't stop the sickness, but it may help you sleep." Mira thanked her and left, her hands shaking slightly. She didn't tell anyone what the woman looked like, only that the house was not empty and that someone there still believed in fighting the dark quietly, alone, with roots and smoke. That night, Mira slept through without waking, and in the morning, the pouch still hung over her bed, swaying slightly, though the window was closed. As the snow began to melt, and the earth softened just enough to hold a boot without cracking, a new fear took root in Thistlebrook. Not the sickness, not the rats, but the quiet, creeping return of hunger. The stores of grain were nearly gone. What little flour remained was stretched with bark and ground roots. Soup was made from bones already boiled 3 times. Children no longer played in the square. Their legs were too thin, their eyes too quiet. People had begun to look at each other differently. There had once been trust in Thistlebrook. You could leave your shovel outside, and it would be there in the morning. You could ask a neighbor for salt, and they would give it gladly. But now, doors stayed shut. Words were short. Smiles were rare. It was Joran who noticed first. Noticed that bread was being made in homes that should have had no flour. Noticed the scent of stew from cottages that were supposed to be empty of meat. One morning, he gathered the council, what was left of it, and spoke softly. We said we would share. That was the promise. But now some have more, and some have none. No one replied, not because they disagreed, but because they already knew. A week later, a sack of barley disappeared from the shared storeroom. It had been hidden under a bench, meant for the sick. The next night, the last dried apples vanished. Tomas the baker found his door ajar one morning. Inside, his shelves were untouched, but footprints led to the back room. Someone had been there and had taken nothing. Or maybe something he hadn't noticed yet. The people of Thistlebrook held another meeting. This cannot go on, said Marta. We must watch the stores. We must keep guard. A system was made. 2 people would watch each night, quietly, without weapons. But the 3rd night, the watchers didn't come. They said it was too cold, too dark, too dangerous. The food kept vanishing. A little at a time. A spoonful here, a pinch there. One evening, a young boy was caught with a loaf under his coat. He cried, said his sister was hungry, that their mother hadn't eaten in 2 days. No one yelled. No one punished him. They just let him go. After that, the watching stopped because everyone knew the truth. The law in Thistlebrook had always been spoken, not written. It lived in trust and fairness. But hunger does not speak. Hunger only takes, and in a village where no one had enough, the law was just another thing that could disappear. It happened quietly, as most things did in Thistlebrook that winter. One morning, the sun barely risen, Mira was walking past the chapel on her way to fetch water when she noticed something strange. There was something lying near the edge of the square, long and still. As she drew closer, she stopped. It was a man, face down in the frost. Not moving, she ran to get Joran. The village gathered slowly, eyes wide, boots crunching softly on the frozen ground. Tomas turned the body over. It was Bren, a young man who had helped watch the stores, one of the few who had still spoken in meetings. He had a bruise on the side of his head. His hands were scraped, one eye blackened. Beside him, half buried in the snow, was a shovel. There was no blood, no sign of a fight, just that mark, and the shovel. Who found him? Someone asked. Mira, Joran said, placing a hand on her shoulder. She was only walking, the people murmured. Bren had not been loved by all, but he had been fair and strong. And now he was dead. Corvin came too. He stood over the body for a moment, then turned and walked away. Keep him away from the others, he said softly. If he was sick, you must burn him. But what if he wasn't? Marta asked. What if this wasn't sickness? Joran looked out over the group. We don't know what happened. Not yet, but the whispers had already started. Someone said Bren had found something hidden. A stash of food. A secret store Someone else said he had been asking too many questions. By evening, every door was locked. The next day, Tomas found someone had broken into his shed. Nothing was taken, but the shovel was gone. People began to walk in pairs. Some began to carry tools just in case. Joran tried again to speak peace. We cannot let fear take more than it already has. But it was too late. The village had buried many bodies that winter, but this was the first that felt like a message, and the message was clear. Someone was hungry enough to kill, and no one knew who would be next. 3 days after Bren was found, a sharp smell woke the village before dawn. Smoke. At first, people thought it was the morning fires. But the smoke was thick and dark, curling through the trees and across the roofs. It had a bitter edge to it. Heavy and strange, Mira and her mother opened their door and saw it. Red light glowing from behind the old carpenter's barn. By the time they reached it, others were already there. The barn was burning fast. Too fast. Flames danced up the walls, like they had been waiting for the chance. The roof collapsed in a hiss of sparks. Someone shouted for water, but no one moved. There was nothing to save, and then they saw what was inside. Shapes. Still. Darkened. Human. Joran stepped forward, hands shaking. "Step back," he said. "All of you." But it was too late. Everyone had seen. There were 3 bodies, 2 adults. 1 child burned beyond names. Beyond faces. Who were they? Marta asked, her voice cracking. No one answered. Corvin arrived late, breathing through his mask. He stood at the edge of the crowd. They were put there, he said quietly. Before the fire, Mira looked at the snow around the barn. There were no footprints. They were carried, said Elric, who had been silent for days. Joran closed his eyes. We must bury the ashes. Tomorrow, but no one came the next day. The snow fell again. Light, quiet, endless. The barn was left. Alone. Just a black shell in the white field. Children stopped walking that way. Dogs would not go near. The village grew quieter still. People spoke less, looked less, trusted less, and though no one said it aloud, they all thought the same thing. Who would burn a family? And why? Some believed it was revenge, others feared it. Was a warning, and a few in their hearts began to wonder, was someone in the village trying to erase the past, or just trying to survive it? It happened just before dawn. A figure was seen walking down the frozen road that led out of the woods. The snow was falling lightly, and the shape moved slowly, wrapped in a long cloak. Mira was the first to notice. She watched from her window, then woke her mother. Soon the word spread. Someone was coming. People gathered by the well, eyes wide, breath fogging in the cold. The figure stepped closer, older, thin. Pale. It was Father Ulrich. No one spoke. He looked different. His beard was longer and his eyes sunken, but it was him. Joran stepped forward. We thought you were dead. Ulrich gave a tired smile. I nearly was. He didn't say where he had been. Not at first. He simply asked to see the chapel. The doors groaned as he opened them. Dust hung in the air. The candles were gone. The altar bare. Ulrich stood at the front and bowed his head. I have come back, he said softly. But I see the village has changed. The people watched him with mixed feelings. Relief. Confusion. Doubt. He spent the next days in silence. Cleaning. Repairing the chapel. Lighting candles one by one. He asked for no help. Then, on the 3rd day, he spoke again. Things are broken, he said to the gathered crowd. But not beyond repair. He held no sermons. No long prayers. Only quiet words spoken with care But his return unsettled many. Corvin, when told, said nothing. He simply turned back to his notes and fire. Some villagers welcomed Ulrich's presence. Others avoided him. He left us when we needed him, Marta whispered. Now he wants to lead? But a few began visiting the chapel again. Just to sit. Just to think. One night, Mira asked Ulrich, "Why did you leave?" He looked at her for a long time. "Because I was afraid," he said. "But I learned something in that fear." He didn't say what he learned, but from then on, he lit a candle every night. For the dead. For the living. For what was still possible. And though the village was still quiet, a small warmth began to return to the chapel, faint but steady. As the village held its breath between silence and snow, a group of young men began to meet outside the eyes of the elders. They gathered near the edge of the forest, where the trees grew close and the shadows hid their words. Among them were Ulrich, whose voice had grown cold, and two others, Darren and Mikkel brothers, who had once been cheerful and loud, but now walked with shoulders hunched and eyes sharp. They called it a watch. They said they were protecting what little the village had left, but it was more than that. They spoke of food, not what was left, but what was owed. The Lord's grain sits behind walls, Darren said. We starve while his halls stay warm, Mikkel added. He hasn't sent help. Not once. He left us to rot. Ulrich, staring into the flames of their small fire, said, Then maybe it's time we stop asking. No one disagreed. They began venturing deeper into the woods, away from where paths were known. They followed old tracks and hidden trails, guided. By instinct and hunger, one night, they came upon an old hunting lodge, long abandoned. The roof sagged, and the doors hung loose, but it stood. They made it their place. There they planned. They spoke of taking, of reclaiming, of survival. One of them, a quiet boy named Noel, brought a bough. Another, a sack of dried herbs he had taken from his father's shelf. It's not stealing, Mikkel said. Not if it keeps us alive. They called themselves nothing, wrote nothing. But their eyes were sharp, and their steps careful. Back in the village, people noticed fewer boys in the square, fewer voices in the cold. Joran asked questions, but no one answered. Even Corvin watched the woods a little longer each day, and Mira, passing the trees, once heard something in the dark, a chant, low, soft. Words she did not know. She told no one. But after that, she kept her window closed at night, because sometimes, even when you don't see the fire, you can still smell the smoke, and something had been lit in the forest, something that was growing. It was Mira who noticed first. For 3 mornings in a row, no smoke rose from the chimney of the weaver's hut. The shutters stayed closed. The snow piled up at the doorstep untouched. Corvin was gone. No one had seen him leave. No one had heard footsteps. His satchel remained inside, along with his glass jars and strange herbs. Only the mask was missing. Joran stood in the center of the hut, arms crossed. He wouldn't leave like this, he said. Tomas shook his head. He always said he'd warn us first. They searched the village, then the edge of the woods. But there was nothing. No trail. No prints, only absence. Some said he had left because the sickness had moved on. Others believed he had grown tired of trying to help people who wouldn't help each other. A few whispered that something had taken him. The forest had grown darker. Ulrich and the others had not returned. The hunting lodge was empty when Joran finally found the courage to search it. Inside were burnt-out torches, scraps of cloth, and a single word scratched into the wall. Enough. Back in the village, people spoke even less. The chapel stayed open. But Father Ulrich began to speak of strange things, of judgment and fire, of voices in dreams. He burned herbs Mira had never seen before. When she asked him why, he simply said, "To keep them from getting closer." Who, he did not answer. On the 5th night after Corvin vanished, a storm came. Heavy snow. Loud winds in the morning. Someone found a black cloak hanging from a tree at the village's edge. It had a single tear near the collar, and beneath it, buried just beneath the snow, the plague doctor's mask, untouched, facing the village, waiting. Spring did not come gently. The snow melted in thick gray clumps, leaving the roads slick and the fields drowned. The sun shone without warmth. Trees bloomed late, and the birds that returned sang only in the early mornings, as if unsure whether it was safe to stay, and in Thistlebrook the hunger remained. What stores had not been stolen or spoiled were now dust. People boiled bark, ground bones, dug up frozen roots. Then, one morning, Darien returned. He stood at the village edge, thinner than before, his coat torn, but his eyes bright with something that looked like fire. He carried a sack over his shoulder. Inside were things, dried mushrooms, black bread, salted fish. He gave them freely. Others returned too. Mikkel, Noel, 2 more boys who had not been missed until they came back. They brought food. Little by little. Enough to share but not to question. When Joran asked, Darren said only, "We took what we needed." Ulrich warned the people to stay cautious. "Not all gifts are free," he said, but few listened. That week, the fires burned. Higher. Bread returned to the tables, even if it was coarse and dark. Laughter was heard again, soft and careful, and so a feast was held, not a grand one, not like the old days, but the first shared meal in many months. It was held in the square. Bowls were filled. Hands passed bread. Smoke rose from clean fires. Mira watched it all and smiled. For the first time in what felt like forever, the village looked alive. But later that night, when the fires had gone out and people lay in bed, the coughing returned, soft, then louder, and in one house, a child did not wake. The food had come. Yes, but no one had asked from where, and not all hunger lives in the belly. At first, they thought it was thunder. The sound rolled low and far across the hills. But there were no clouds, no storm, only dry wind in a pale morning sky. Then Mira saw them, figures on the ridge above Thistlebrook. Dark, slow-moving, carrying tools and sacks. Walking in a line that stretched like a scar across the land, the boys had returned again. But this time, they were not boys. They were many, and they were not alone. Darren stood at the front, his eyes no longer bright with fire. Now they were flat, as if something behind them had gone out. Joran rang the chapel bell. Once, then twice. A third time, the villagers gathered, silent, watching, waiting. Ulrich stood on the steps of the chapel. "They come as wolves," he said quietly, "and we are without fences." When the group reached the edge of the village, they stopped. No weapons were drawn. No shouts were made. Just silence. Then Darren spoke. "We lived through the woods. We lived through what you would not." Mikkel stepped forward. "We have what you need. But it's not free anymore." Joran stepped down. "What is it you want?" "Control," Darren said. "Choice. Safety." He looked around. No more waiting for help. No more hunger. No more silence. Some villagers nodded. Others turned away. A few backed into their homes. Ulrich's voice rose, calm but firm. "And what must we give for this safety?" Darren smiled faintly. "Obedience." The village stood still. Not everyone agreed. But no one stopped them when they entered. They took the square, the chapel, the storehouse. Not with force, but with presence, and slowly, quietly. Thistlebrook changed again. And no one called it a takeover, but the old ways were gone. Now there were watchers. Rules. A new kind of order. Mira lit a candle that night. Alone behind her window, outside someone watched, and in the dark, it was no longer clear who were the beasts, or if they had always been here, waiting.